Welcome to our next session. We have the opportunity for question time. But first of all, we're going to ask our panellists to tell us a little bit about leadership from their perspective. So you have, as you can see on your sheets here, we've got Paul Tonner, Director of Nursing and Quality, NHS England Essex Area Team. We then have Joy Kirby, LSA Midwifery Lead, and Ruth Ashmore, Associate Director, Strategic Clinical Networks and Senate. Try and say that with my teeth in. Thank you. So we're going to hear from our three panellists, and whilst you are listening to them, feel free to jot down on a post-it any questions that crop up into your minds, or if you're absolutely desperate to ask a question during the course of their little piece that they have to tell you about leadership from their perspective, then I'm sure they won't mind if you indicate that. So they'll tell you if they're able to take the question at that point in time. Would that be okay, panellists? Yeah. Fantastic. So first up, we have Paul Tonner.
Thank you very much. I want to read something to you first, just before we begin, just to set the context of where I come from as a system leader. The NHS belongs to the people. It is there to improve our health and well-being, support us to keep mentally and physically well, to get better when we were ill and we cannot recover, to stay as well as we can to the end of our lives. It works to the limits of science, brings the highest levels of human knowledge and skills to save lives and improve health. It touches our lives at times of basic human need when care and compassion are what matter the most. So that's what NHS England say about what we all do every day. So whatever the context of your job, that's your goal every single day when you work in the NHS. Being a system leader wasn't what I had ambitions of when I was at school. I always wanted to be a nurse. Which is a strange thing, probably for a guy brought up in Ireland at the time, and it was not the normal thing that people wanted to do. But at the time, my father said, "No, you're not going to be a nurse. You're going to do something else." So I spent 2 years studying radiography. Really didn't like it, left, and became a nurse. So I got what I wanted at the end of the day. And I really wanted to help people and improve lives, and that's still what I want to do every single day. But you've got to balance what it is in being your leadership role during the day and what you are for the rest of your life. So at home, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm a rugby coach at the weekends. But during the week, when you're having to put in a 12 or 14-hour day on a regular basis, it's tough. It's a tough gig. And for those of you who have ambitions to become a director of nursing, it's a tough gig. So just think about it. But I wouldn't have it any other way. But it is a tough gig. My role as a system leader in Essex and as Director of Nursing and Quality for the Essex system is responsible for clinical and other governance that happens across patient care, patient experience, and quality and safety. And ultimately, the clinical leadership of that is quite difficult. And you don't know what's going to come through in the email every day. You don't know what's going to happen on the patch that day. And you don't sometimes know how to manage it. And I reflect on an issue that myself and Joy had to deal with a couple of years ago. You know, the Friday evening phone call that says something bad's really happened. You've got thousands of patients to deal with. Question mark, what are you going to do about it? And sometimes you need to rely on your networks that we're talking about this morning. And when you've got solid networks that you can rely on and people that you can fall back on that you've helped in the past, it's invaluable. And my personal style around leadership is a coaching style. So being a coach on many different levels, I do heavily rely on networks of people that I've been involved with before and involved with in the past. And you rely heavily on your colleagues that have done slightly different but similar things when you know it's all hit the fan and you've got to deal with it today. Ultimately, we're looking at things like patient safety, serious incident management, root cause analysis, but lessons learned back into the system again. So as system leaders, when things happen, we need to get the lessons back into the system again. We need to make sure those mistakes don't happen in the future. The challenges for NHS leaders has never been greater at this time. The demand for greater efficiency, unprecedented levels of change, and staff morale mean that emerging leaders will need to lead in a different way, and you need to think as you emerge as system leaders in the future about how you're going to do it differently and how you're going to do it in a world where the NHS look differently. It's cash limited, it's very politically orientated, and you need to think about how you're going to manage within that as well. And compassion in practice is in the heart of everything that you have to do. You need to develop your own personal awareness and your authenticity as a leader. What sort of a leader are you going to be? I'm a coaching style leader. I've got compassion and practice at the heart of what I want to do. And I also get reflected back onto me a lot that I'm a nice guy, so I don't intentionally go out to annoy people. I don't intentionally go out to upset people, and I don't go for people's feelings to get what I want. Because what I want performance to happen every day, not just tomorrow and the next day. I want it to continue. So relationship management is extremely important. You need to think about your own personal leadership journey. Where is it you want to get to? Think about where you want to get to and work your way through that. Now, in the midst of all that, you'll have organisational change, you'll have change that happens in the system that you weren't expecting. But keep your goal in sight and keep your coach with you, because I do recommend coaching as a support for developing leaders. Keep your goal in sight all of the time. Enable people around you to support your ideal goal of a compassionate culture. Compassion in practice will help us through everything. It'll solve the problems of the NHS if we think about the patient, treating them compassionately, and the patient's experience and outcome as what we're looking to achieve every day. And your own personal responsibility to have a safe, high-quality care system that we work within as well. Strengthen your own ability to navigate the system and use your collective partners in that, so your networks, your people you work with every day, the experiences that you gather every day as part of that as well. You need to think of yourself as a leader, because all of you are here, not just because you're emerging leaders, but you are leaders right now at the minute. The impact of your style and the impact of your behaviour is really important. So your 360-degree appraisals, whatever it is you use to get your own, to reflect back on your own behaviour again, or using something like a meta mirror within coaching styles as well to understand what your own style is. Yourself in relation to others, how you fit in, where you need to change, how you need to be a bit of a chameleon sometimes around how you behave with people. And you within the system. What is it your role is within the system? And don't just think because somebody else is sitting high above you that that's their responsibility. It's all of our responsibilities to manage within the system as well. It's difficult decisions every day. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's your responsibility, it's our responsibility, it's my responsibility to set the organisational and cultural tone every single day. And don't forget that. And I'll leave you with a little quote from Nye Bevan when he was setting up the NHS a long time ago. The NHS will last as long as there are folk with the faith to fight for it. If you've got the faith, we'll have an NHS going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Next up, we have Joy Kirby.
Thank you. I'm not so sure about the filming. I'm just glad I've had my roots done recently. That's helped. Okay. This is me. I'm Joy Kirby. I'm the LSA Midwifery Officer for NHS England, Midlands and East. We love a title in the NHS, don't we? We love a really big title. So, and the reason I've put this up here is not to show off by any means, but it is part of my journey and it does illustrate my journey. And we were asked to talk about our own personal journeys, so I really hope that you want to listen to that. But can I have the next slide, please, Dan? Thank you. So this is my journey, and I suspect that that looks quite similar to some of yours. So down there in the right-hand side, that squiggly bit, where I didn't really know what I was doing, was me between about 15 and 19. I left school without any qualifications whatsoever. At 15, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no focus. I had no purpose. So it took me a little while to kind of sort that out. And one day, a friend of mine said, "Oh, I think I'd like to be a nurse, and I'm going to take this exam this afternoon. Do you want to come?" I thought, well, nothing better to do, okay. So off I went. I failed the exam, I have to tell you, but they took me anyway, because way back in '76, they were pretty desperate for anybody. So, '76, so I started in '76. I've been in the NHS for 38 years, and I'm never saying that out loud again. So, but the important thing for me is that I am firmly committed to the principles of the NHS, and my whole career has been based around doing the right thing for patients and for women. So I'm a midwife through and through now. I started off as a nurse. I started off as an SEN because clearly didn't pass the exam, so entry level. Then I did my student training, and then I was the last cohort to do a year as a midwifery training. So that kind of, and it took me a little while to fall in and find midwifery as the focus for my journey. That was never my intention. And in fact, my mother was a midwife, and I'd always said, you know, absolutely never, not in a million years. But that has been my passion for kind of 34 years. And when I say passion, I genuinely mean passion. I believe that I'm a public servant. I believe I'm here to serve the women on every day. And one of the things that I have maintained, which makes me slightly different at the kind of level that I operate, is that I still practice clinically. So that I am quite unusual in my peers in that I still practice clinically. But for me, that is the most important part. Also, it's the best part for me. It's the bit that I love. I love being with the women. I love helping them birth. So for me, that kind of gives me a sort of different perspective on things, I think, than some of my colleagues have. So that's a really positive thing for me. That squiggly bit in the middle here, this is all a bit of a blur here. This was kind of 10 years when I had 3 children under 5, and I worked part-time and helped my husband with his business and all sorts of things. So that's all a kind of a blur. But the reason it's there is because during that time, I still managed to get some firsts. So I was the first person in the best part of the country to have a job share. I was the first sister to keep my sister's post, even though I was part-time. And those things which we kind of take for granted now, you know, we do take them for granted. Job share, everyone was like, job share, what was the big thing about that? But actually, I was, for a lot of the time, the dancing man, but I'm also very conscious that I would be the first person to pick that up and, you know, be the second guy dancing there. So then I went up a bit, and my first manager's post was about here. This was a good time. And I heard about it on the Wednesday and went for it on the Friday. Tracy? And, you know, the thing that I have kind of worked to over all these years is I have been opportunistic. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a path. Even once I got into midwifery, I didn't have a path to where that would go. And at that time, remember, there were only 2 paths. It was either management or education. Well, clearly, with no sort of qualifications, I was never going into education. So I had to go into management. But actually, that, for me, was one of the best things that I could ever do, because it gave me the ability to change things from the inside in a way that I couldn't do as a clinically based midwife. So that was very, very positive. So I was a manager in the same trust for 21, well, I worked there for the whole 21 years. And then I got this role here. This is about 1996. And I said, right, I'm not doing this for more than 2 years. This is not for me. So here I am kind of 18 years later, and I'm still doing the same job. The job has moved on. I had the opportunity, which I really hope that some of you will get, I had the opportunity to make the job my own. It was brand new. Nobody had ever done it before. I had a job description which was about this long, which included, for the midwives amongst us trainees, implement change in childbirth. So just this one-liner. So that was what my job description was. But I have managed over the years, I think, to make the job and the role my own. I'm the longest standing LSA midwifery officer, which I know doesn't mean anything to you and will mean to Tracy. I'm responsible I carry out the statutory function for the supervision of midwives for NHS England, Midlands and East. I'm responsible and accountable for 200 supervisors and midwives, nearly 3,000 midwives, and we support women through 71,500 births a year. So it's quite a big role. I travel for the whole of, over the whole of the east of England, and I have the opportunity to see what happens in lots of different places. And if there's one thing I would say to you, that's what you need to do. Get out and see what else is going on here. And that's why this is such a good opportunity for you. You get to hear what's happening in all sorts of places that you might not have the opportunity to see into if you just stay in your own little space. It is so much better. You can learn so much more if you get out there. Can I just have the last slide, please, Dan? So this is the last thing I wanted to say. We were asked to talk about our own insights into leadership. And I knew that I was here with Pol and with Ruth, and I've known both of them for quite some time, and that I have looked up to them and seen them as leaders in kind of the whole health community. So I was trying to think of some of the things, some of the words that I would apply to them. So these are some of the words I came up with. And I also asked 2 or 3 people, including my boss, if they would give me some words about how they saw me. And it was I felt really pleased. I did feel really pleased because almost all of those words were there, applied to me in the same way as I'd applied them to Ruth and Paul. And that was really kind of reinforcing for me and made me feel quite good about it. There are some things that I know that I still quite haven't got. I prefer to operationalise things than to think strategically, and that is something I have to work on all the time. But if I had to kind of pick even 2 that I have thought that have really been the words that have moved me forward over all these years, opportunistic would be one. I said yes to every single thing that came my way, every pilot that was going, every opportunity, I just said yes. I didn't even think about the consequences of it, I just said yes. And that has opened so many doors over the years that I would really say, you know, it's so easy to say no, isn't it? You know, it's such a short word and you can just say it so quickly. Try and say yes every single time because it will open doors for you that you hadn't ever expected. And I think as well, this is one. And I know some people would argue that, but I do like to think that I'm a role model, and I have had some excellent role models in my career that I look up to and are still there and act as role models for me. And I think if we want to talk about changing behaviours and getting people to accept responsibility and all of the things that you have outlined all around the room here, being a role model for that is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. That's all.
Thank you, Joy. And the third panellist, we have Ruth Ashmore.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Joy. That's been an absolute pleasure to hear your stories, and I, as I said, known each other a long time. So when I was asked about being a leader, I thought back to the beginnings, and I'm a storyteller by nature. So if you push the next slide on, Danny, please. I was born in the 1960s. I know I don't look that old. The swinging 60s of peace, love and music. And just looking around the room, I recognise that a lot of us are probably coming from very common pathways. But I was born into a household with very strong women. Women who were nurses, doctors, who had a passion for public service. And actually when I came into the workplace, or when I finished my education, I was a diligent student. I was always very nosy. I was often outside the classroom because I talked a lot, and that created problems. I'm one of 3, I'm the middle child, but I'm not the brightest of the 3. My sister, who's younger by 11 months, is very bright, very smart. My brother's the same. I was always that middle child who just was consistent, diligent, and that's the word that people used. But I did come from that very strong background of public service. So if we push the next slide on, Danny. And part of that story is about being caring and loving. And part of what attracted me to being a nurse, because I could have gone several other ways, and I did for a while. I trained to be a social worker and realised that actually they have a really tough job. It's a terrible way to do things. I worked in a mother and baby home when I qualified, and that was tragic. But what I recognised is I couldn't make much of an impact. These people had lives that were tragic from the day they were born. And I didn't feel very powerful. I didn't feel I was making a difference. And I like Winnie the Pooh. I'm an avid reader and Radio 4 listener, and that starts me off in the day. And what I was always told from a very young age is, be the person you want to be, seize the opportunities. And I'm reflecting back what Joy and Paul have said. Next slide. For me, leadership is not an affair of the head, it's an affair of the heart. And somebody asked me today, what keeps you going? It's that passion for doing the right thing at the right time to the right people. And Coos and Posner are very much around that. So what ignites your passion? What keeps you going? What makes you get up every morning at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock on that daily grind of work? For me, it's about the patient. Next slide. So in the 1980s, when I entered the nursing world, it was a very different world from where we are today. You might just see me here. I trained at St George's in South London, and I was very lucky because I was a graduate. I was able to do a very shortened course of 2 years. And in those days,
You did 2 years of training and then you were a staff nurse. You had a hat that took 4 hours to make. In fact, that was the most focused bit of my training, was how to make the hat. I survived 6 months. And I vividly remember why I decided that I wouldn't continue to be a nurse on a general ward of adults, was because the hat, when we had a cardiac arrest, went under the arrest trolley and I never saw it again. So I went to train to be a paediatric nurse, and that's where my heart has been ever since, and midwifery. So 1980s was very similar to it is today. There were no jobs, there was no money, it was awful. And we were all paid a pittance. Next slide. The 1990s and 2000s were really about me. So by this time, I had a quite meteoric rise. So 2 years training. Then within another 2 years, I was a senior ward sister and ward manager. So pretty meteoric. And nobody ever told me how to be a leader. And I got to 11 years of being quite a senior person in paediatrics, having some quite difficult decisions to make. And I remember vividly the manager saying to me, "Don't ask me about management or leadership training, you've got the job now." But after about 10 years, I recognised I had a lot of gaps. I had a lot of knowledge, clinically, but I didn't know how to lead. And one of the director of nursing put a leaflet under my door and said, "What about this?" So I had a general manager who was a chap at the time who said to me, "Oh, you don't want to do that. Just stay where you are. Keep your head down. It's okay. I'll look after you. Carry on." And I thought, blow me down. What does he know? He had been a graduate, he'd been an NHS trainee, he'd been in the NHS for 30 years, and he really felt nurses should be in their place. So I thought, oh, sod him, I'm going to do it. So I applied to the King's Fund to do a nurse leadership programme, and I was chosen from about 400 people to take this programme, to be a board nurse within 5 years. So that was 1999 until 2001. And I think what it told me is that I couldn't be that person. I think Paul's reflection on being a director of nursing, it's a difficult job. But I did learn, and I did network, and I did learn how to be a leader. And that was important. And you might want to ask me. But I always had this, am I good enough? What's missing? And there's something called imposter syndrome, which I think women particularly often feel. But I made some good networks. I made some good friends who are lasting today. And I learned what you need to get by. Next slide. So for me, leadership is about, if you just click them through, fast thinking, then deciding, followed by acting swiftly, and finally reflecting. And if I think about my journey as a nurse, it was in the times when, in the 80s, we just did everything by rote. You know, I was brought up with the backs round that went round, and I was probably in my training just as the Cardex was going out the window and care planning was coming in. And we were taught very much to think for ourselves and to challenge. I was also very lucky in that I was trained jointly with doctors, so I never had a problem about challenging them or having questions, because I'd learnt with them. So I'm vastly running out of time, but for me, that's the most important thing, is understand what type of leader you want to be. What will that mean for you, and what do you need to do to get to be where you want to be? So can you push it on, Danny, quite quickly? And there's quite a lot of work about being a resonant leader, and for me, it's about what do I want to be? What's the skills and weaknesses or gaps that I have? What do I need to do? And what do I need to seek and learn out and practice? What do I need to get mastery over to be a good leader? And who do I need along that journey? I think both Joy and Paul have described that very nicely. What do you need as an aid or compass? And how can you use them to make the change happen for you, for your organisation and for patients? So if you just quickly flick on. And I always think about this. What it means to me to be a leader is to learn and to constantly learn. Every day, learn something new. To make sure you never lose empathy for your colleagues, for your patients, for your family. And act. Don't just sit and do nothing. And for me, it's about dreaming the impossible dream. So going back to that 60s concept, is think about what rocks your boat, what makes things happen. So if you just push it right onto the last slide. And we heard a lot about this, is everybody can be a leader, but it's a bit like the man on a hill. You need some followers. And cultivate those, understand where they're coming from, learn about them, and use that anachronism. And the last slide is really about my journey. It's a bumpy road, there's a bit of horizon, and I'm learning every day. But I am learning through social media, and that's one thing I've really grasped over the last year. So thank you for inviting me here today, and please ask some more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all three of our panellists. Now, there must be some questions that have been sparked by those, at least some thoughts or some comments from you. I'm going to use this mic and ask you to speak into it as you ask your questions. So can I have a show of a hand if anyone has one of those questions they would like to ask, please? Or a comment that you'd like to make? Thank you, yeah.
How on earth do you cope with the imposter syndrome? The impossible question.
I think it's about recognising when you're in that grip. And I think it's probably like days to day, isn't it? It's like, why did they invite me? Joy, you should have seen the emails when Karen asked. Why? I think you just recognise it's there and don't let it take over and just kind of sail through it. So it's all those cliched words, but seize control of it and understand when you feel like that and recognise it in others.
Okay, we have another question.
You guys have all had really long careers, haven't you, since from leaving school in healthcare and nursing, and I've only been qualified 4 years, so you're amazing. But what I find is my peers who I work with, they're quite dismissive of the fact that I've only been qualified 4 years, even though I'm a band 6, and they think, oh, well, you've not been in it since you were, knee-high to a grasshopper. So I keep coming out with, up with barriers to development. Do you know what I mean? And I really think you guys are fantastic. Most of your career's been in it, but I just want to say, well, hey, I've still got something to offer, even though I've been a nurse for only 4.
So I probably had more barriers than most people because I started from a position that was so low down, you couldn't get any sort of lower than that really. But it is about just taking every opportunity, and to a certain extent it's not about ignoring what people say, because you need to have people's feedback all the time. But even if I wasn't particularly supported in something, I still did it. I still went ahead and did it, and even if I had to do it in my own time, I paid for all sorts of things. I did my degree when I had 3 small children and a full-time job. You have to want to do it, and you have to just keep moving yourself forward, because I think my philosophy is nobody's going to do it for me. It's only me that can do it in the face of whatever, and sometimes you don't have the support that you want, but only you can move it if you forward yourself.
I think it's about having perseverance and grit. There's some slides on there. I'm a great believer in, like Joyce says, is seizing the opportunity, and don't listen to what people say. And just get on with it. I moved from an E grade to an H grade in a year. In the days when, because paediatrics was so tight, there weren't enough people who had the right qualifications. So if you just happen to be the person with the qualification, it's like midwifery, you're there. You have to take control. And you just have to learn every day and keep that vision about what's right. And what's right is doing right by the patients and the children and the families for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a lot of coaching with people who come up against barriers, and with a number of senior female nurses that felt there's a glass ceiling, and the glass ceiling can be broken. The barriers can be taken out of the way. Just because somebody's had 14 years service and you've had 4 years service, are they better than you? Are they more competent than you? They could be less competent than you. So it's about mindset and it's about your own drive forward. But maybe recommend a bit of coaching around, you know, getting your head around it and moving it forward, because it's all doable. It's well doable. Well, it's your self-belief that'll drive it. It won't be other self-belief. So.
Okay, thank you. And it's interesting, this level of the imposter syndrome and the self-belief aspect that's just cropped up in the first 2 questions. I'm not saying the next one has to follow thread, but do we have a third question? Somebody else that would like to make a question or a comment?
Sound loud enough, you can probably hear without that.
It's just about recording it. So.
Okay. I was very interested in the fact that you recognised that actually perhaps being chief nurse or a director of nursing wasn't what you wanted to be, because that's quite brave, because everything that in most hospitals, it's that hierarchy, as you said, Joy, that it was, you know, you either go up the education route and people only see the 2 routes. And it's interesting now that I think there are more roles that involve quality and patient safety in particular. And it's making those roles attractive to people, because there are people with some really good skills out there that I've come across within my own organisation who are fantastic at those things. But their self-belief and the opportunities aren't always there for them. I think as an NHS we need to recognise those a bit more. There are more than 2 routes to go down. I don't know if that's a question as much as a comment.
To be fair, I was actually talking about back in sort of the early 80s, there was nowhere else to go. If I had had the opportunity at that time, my actual chosen path would have been a consultant midwife. That would have been absolutely perfect for me, still involved in clinical practice, but with the opportunity to change things and move things forward. But those opportunities just weren't there at that time, so it was management or education. But you're quite right, there are a lot more opportunities now than there were before, which is a really good thing.
I think for me, going on a leadership programme was very challenging. I did feel, why am I here? I look at my peers who are on that course in those years, and some of them are in some very, very senior positions now in NHS England or in, you know, whatever, trusts, whatever. And the whole time I was there, I thought, why am I here? What have they seen in me? And I quickly recognised that actually I was as good as them, and I had a different perspective to bring, and a lot of that was about challenging them at times, and you know, being Helen Bevan uses the boat rocker phrase. You know, actually I am probably that person who does the first thing, and I made some very brave decisions, and one of those brave decisions was to hand my notice in with no job to go to, and I gave my 3 months notice. I'd been in the post in the trust and had quite a lot of career progression in that 11 years, but I just felt I'd outgrown the organisation. I'd outgrown the people around me who just felt like they were stuck in a mindset, and I'd been given a glimpse, a bit like you have on these programmes, of there is a different world out there. There is something else you can do with your skill set. And I just felt alien to it, and I had to get out. I didn't have a job to go to. I was walking out of the hospital that I'd been in for 11 years. I'd closed a ward, I'd closed a whole system, and ultimately it's led to the closure of the hospital. And I just had enough. I was burnt out. But I walked down the corridor and somebody walked towards me who I hadn't seen for a while, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to have a break. I'm going to finish my MSc. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that." No, she said, "You can't do that. There's a job for you. You need to come and have an interview." And I went for a few days holiday, and then I went for an interview, and literally I had 5 days off. My husband said, "You're mad." And I didn't know what the job was. A bit like Joy said, I made the job what it was. And then that's kind of led to different roles and different opportunities. And it is about what you make. I'm a firm believer in that.
And it's also about using the opportunities that come up. I mean, I've been subject to about 5 huge reorganisations where it's completely throws you off your career path. And one of the things that you probably wouldn't expect, that, you know, I spent 4 years as the regional head of mental health and learning disabilities, and I'm a general nurse by background, and I was an absolute specialist at it, and I was absolutely fabulous at it, and I can say that because we did a good job across the system, and I came back in again and became a director of nursing as my next job. So it is possible to keep your track and use the experiences as you go along, because it's all good experience. But you know, the commissioning system that sits alongside the NHS at the minute, a lot of people that work within hospitals don't really understand the commissioning system, the governance system that sits within that. You know, the system within NHS England, the system within CCGs, and within local authorities as well, that, you know, are complementary to the work we do in the NHS. So there's huge opportunities, and I would say use the opportunities, and change is a fabulous thing. I'm not afraid of change anymore, because actually it can throw you off path, but actually give you good experiences along the way. So.
Just say something about change. In the NHS, we are subject to change about every 2 years. In the last 12 years, I've had 8 different bosses who have come and gone, and the changes that have gone on. But I believe, and I don't know quite how I've managed to survive in pretty much the same job all this time. But I think it is about being consistent, and it's about having the same values and just keeping going all of the time, even though everything around you is sort of swirling around and you're not really sure where you are in it. You know, if you keep consistent, you will come down on your feet in the end, is kind of what I believe. So.
Yeah, I firmly believe keep your values to your core. I was saying to somebody, we were talking, and you find yourself saying in the old days, and you try not to, but actually I hope if somebody split me in half, you'd still see nurse running through me like a stick of rock, because those core values that those nurses in the 80s taught me, even in that short time, was that the patient is king. And I think if we do not remember that that's the customer in this service, and I've been a commissioner, I've been highly specialised commissioner doing very national pieces of work around all sorts of things, you do have to remind people who sit at the big table, actually, where's the patient? Can we bring the patient in the room and have the patient conversation? Because actually we're talking about their service. And I think people, you lose that at your peril. And I'm often the person that says, do we need to do this? I don't like doing things for things' sake. And if I can find an easy way to do something, I think that's about survival as well. So, you know, keep persevering and keep some grit at your core, is what I'd say.
Okay, some lovely messages coming out about that level of grit, perseverance, but authentically you is sort of what I'm also hearing, is being yourself. And it's what Karen mentioned at the start when you opened up and said, if you cut me in half, you'll see nurse running right through me. It's really interesting to hear. And why are you doing what you're doing? The patient being at the heart of things. And if any of you've come across Simon Sinek, he's got a TED talk and he talks about the golden circles, and you can know what you do and you know how you do it, but in the centre of that golden circle is why you do it. And that's also really important. Do we have another question?
Hi, it's more of a comment really. Having done this now for coming up a year with my cohort from Leeds originally in July, a lot of focus has been around the basics, and you've all mentioned the basic nursing care and how we can provide it and values and standards. An environment that I work in, it's a very high flow department. We've got lots of changes happening all the time. I just wondered what your views are upon how things are changing in the nursing sort of development from when you're a student now, because a lot of it is academic as opposed to sort of being on the wards and things like that. And I think a lot of it starts from the beginning. And I just wondered how you see the future for, say, student nurses coming through in the changes that are happening with students.
I don't know whether you're aware, but there's in the east of England, and now spreading across the whole of England, there's a fundamental review of the pre-reg training courses. And as a system, we've all got the opportunity to feed into that, because we recognise that the fundamentals of care need to be back in there, plus the academic ability needs to be there as well. So it's not going to move away from, you know, a good and strong academic degree programme or whatever it is in the end, but also going back to the basics around the fundamentals of care, compassion in practice, and a generic understanding. My view is a generic understanding of care for all people, so you can look after anybody that comes in through your department. But that's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a while to do that as well. But also looking at some of the other post-registration courses, you know, it's bringing in the opportunity to convert from one branch to the other. It's bringing in the opportunity to, you know, become a midwife, become a health visitor, and those opportunities are there in the system. But can they be made a bit easier? Is there something about the pre-reg course that can make them easier as well? So there is quite a lot of work going on, and there is, and I don't know whether Karen's got it available. There is a hashtag to Kathy Branson's link to the fundamental review, so people can feed into that fundamental review and say, actually, I believe this. But also there's going to be some roadshows and workshops around that as well.
Yeah, I'd just echo what Paul said. I mean, I come very much from understanding that knowledge is powerful and understanding that evidence is king. But actually, I think at the heart of that is when you go into a ward, and, you know, I'm now thinking about my parents who are frail and elderly, they're in their 90s, who need care, and I don't see that. And that for me is so tragic. But at other times I see care come to the fore, so there are some shining beacons. So what is it we've lost? So in my day we were moving from being a craft, an artisan, to being a profession, but in that we seem to have lost something. And this word around vocation is bandied around, isn't it? What does it mean? It means to me about love and care, and that's what I think we need to get back in. I felt when the 6 C's came out as a nurse, it was all a bit, oh my God, this is patronising as hell, actually. And you know, a lot of us in senior positions have felt teaching mother to suck eggs. But maybe that's because that was just what we learned. We didn't have to be told it. And why is it just nurses that have to have the 6 C's? It's everybody, isn't it? From the cleaner, from the person who says hello when you walk through the door. That's what's important to me. It's bringing that humane face back into what we do.
Just a last comment. I'm even more concerned because I'm closer to needing that care than my parents almost. So I'm quite concerned about it. But when I work with students, you know, it strikes me that they are more concerned with, you know, they don't look at the woman. They look at everything else that's going on all around and the monitor and all those things, but they never actually look at the woman and they never speak to her, you know, in the same way as I do. And so when I work with them, what I'm trying to do is to literally go back to basics and say, forget all of that, you know, just focus on the woman and try and be with her and support her. And that's the bit that we've missed. We don't focus in on, and I can only speak as a midwife, but my impression is that we don't look at people as people. We look at them as something in a bed that has, you know, no feelings, that we don't attach to, which is the bit I think is missing.
I think we have to recognise that people aren't conditions, and they, most people are going to be, you know, the bubble of age is going to hit us, and there are not enough young people to care for us. And people don't come with a label, they come with a set of things that they need help with and support. And they don't recognise this, I'm an expert in this. And in fact, I think one of the things we also need to do is focus on mental and parative esteem, and actually ensure that people are looked after and they have their well-being as well as their care looked after. And I think we have lost that a bit as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you to your questions. And can we give a round of applause and thank our panellists again, please? Thank you, Paul, Ruth and Joy. Much appreciated.